Welcome to hour number 2 on a Monday with hashtag Daily K's host, Peter Bin. Tired of just scratching the surface of Korea? Want to get deep in the weeds?
We unpack everything about Korea through its history on
Now and Then with David. You may think history, oh, boring, boo, but no. Mr. Tizard does a fantastic job of making it super interesting, yet informative, without embellishing with too many, theatrical thrills and lies. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, David. Rescue me. Good morning.
Good morning. History can be fun. History is important. And it's such a pleasure to talk about history with you, Mr. Bin, and the listeners of Daily K. I love it.
Do you know anything about the history of today's hashtag, I wonder? Because you know everything, David. You're one of the most intelligent people I regularly meet, because other intelligent people won't meet me on a regular basis. Kimbap.
The history of gimbap.
That's today's hashtag.
Wow, you need Ryan here. Or so Ryan is your food, is he?
I think so. He'll maybe know some more. But the reason we're talking about it is because, for the longest time that sandwich chain shop, which in the UK, we would equate to our underground or tube system.
Yes.
They've always had that kind of policy of you could have whatever you want in there. You tailor make it to your really last detail.
Yeah.
And kimbap places maybe have been the equivalent of sandwich shops, but for the longest time, you kind of just get the standard.
Yeah.
You can maybe ask to take one or two things out, but now there's a trend of places where you pick every single ingredient, and that's becoming very popular in Korea, right? And I did mention in the opening to hour 2, I'm a little concerned on the one hand, though, that that's what helps Korean kids and people be really not that fussy. They'll just eat all those veggies in there. So I'm not sure if I'm too positive about it, but that's the reason behind it. Do you like a gimbap? Do you have a favourite one?
I'm a big fan of gimbap. Personally, I do a bacon, cheese and avocado gimbap.
What?
Like fried bacon and put that in your gimbap.
You make that yourself?
You've never done that, have you? And put cheddar cheese in there as well.
What?
And avocado. It's lovely.
That's not something you can buy at too many kimbap shops, right?
You can't buy it. You have to make it.
Wow.
But let's just talk a bit about history, because for the last week or so, online there has been surfaced a menu from Korea's #1 gimbap chain, that restaurant, like let's say Gimbap Heaven. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but it's a big gimbap chain all around the country. Their menu from the early 2000s has surfaced and been shared around, and people are going crazy looking at the prices because a gimbap was just 1,000 won.
Yes, chon-on, right?
Just
back
chon
in the
won.
day.
And you used to be able to walk in and you would pay 1,000 won, which just say it's $1.
Yeah.
And you would get your seaweed roll. For the people that don't know what gimbap is, I guess we should explain that it's a long, it's a tubular thing, but it's seaweed wrapped around rice, and you'd have different things in there. You would get one of those.
Yeah.
You would get some kimchi. You would get some soup. You might get some radish as well. And that was just 1,000 won. It was a meal.
The whole thing, right? If you're sitting down to eat it.
Yeah.
I'm guessing if you took it out, maybe they'd wrap up a few of those side dishes, maybe not. But you're right. When I was here, early 2000s, that would be the price of a kimbap. Then maybe add a couple of thousand won if you wanted a proper like doenjanjjigae with rice, the soybean paste. Inflation really has occurred. What's a kimbap now? Like maybe 4,000, 5,000 won?
5, yeah.
Wow.
It's getting up there. One more thing about gimbap, which is because my daughter loves them, which is triangle gimbap.
Oh, they're convenient, aren't they?
And they come from convenience stores, and you see all the students buying these triangle gimbaps, and it's the equivalent of, in another country, you might buy a sandwich or a pie. Over here, they buy the triangle ones. I'd be very curious to know when the triangle ones came out, because they would have been after the normal rolled ones.
Yes, that's true. And I'm wondering about the origins of those as well, because in other countries, neighboring countries, they have similar things with certain things wrapped in seaweed. So I'm wondering where the links come in. And that triangle one, I believe, is quite popular in other countries. But the Korean packaging of that is so intricate, with the polythene wrap over it, or vinyl wrap, which separates the seaweed from the rice to stop it getting soggy. And then you have to do a little puzzle to take it apart. I was amazed by that the first time.
There's a video online of how they make those.
Oh, wow.
And they just go through this production line of these triangle gimbops being made. Listeners, type in a Korean triangle gimbap making and you'll see this video, and it's fascinating.
It is delicious as well. My daughter, like your daughter, she loves the tuna version of that. And every time we go to the Pyeongchang and she's a bit hungry, she'll say, can I have samgap gimbap, the triangle shape? I recommend it highly. Away from gimbap, although I don't know, is it going to rear its pretty head in today's talk about kings, queens, and Mongolians?
Well, you were making a very interesting point about where gimbap might have come from. And when we think about Korea, we always think about possible Chinese influence, possible Japanese influence, and possible Western influence, predominantly American. These three countries have had a big impact on Korea, its development. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but undoubtedly there. What I want to talk about today is Mongolian influence on Korea, which is not something that you might immediately think about, but the Mongolian influence is huge. Before we get to the Mongolian influence, Peter, let's talk about love.
Oh, okay, David.
I've missed you.
Love?
You've been away for a while. Let's talk about love.
Okay.
Famous Korean couples. Who do you think of?
Lena, I think, went to the wedding of that couple, wasn't it? Son Ye-jin and Hyunbin.
And Hyunbin, the power couple of 2021.
Also from a drama, right, that they were in together.
Yeah, absolutely. You have Kim Woo-bin and Shin Min-ah. They're in their 8th year together.
Already, wow.
Rain and Kim Tae-hee.
Oh, I forgot about them. Kim Tae, I should be forgiven for forgetting about her because she's hardly on screen anymore. So I've got a bit of a grudge against Rain for taking her away from us.
She's mother to 2 children.
She's busy,
Yeah, but there are lots, aren't there? When you think of these Korean power couples, there are celebrities. But when we go, I'm going to add to that list. I'm going to add to the list of Rain and Kim Tae-hee. You're sad about Kim Tae-hee not being on the screens. But don't worry, because today we're going to talk about King Gongmin and Queen Noguk.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better. Thank you so much, Dave. Who on earth are both of those people? I'm sorry, am I being uneducated here?
Well, let's start with King Gongmin, Gongmin Wang. He lived from 1330 to 1374. So I'm taking you back 700 odd years, 3/4 of a century almost. He was the 31st king of the Goryeo dynasty.
Oh, we're going before Joseon.
We're going before Joseon. So before the Joseon dynasty that everyone knows about. I want to talk today about the king that sort of oversaw the fall of the dynasty that preceded the Joseon dynasty.
I hope it wasn't because of his marriage. I hope he's not blaming his queen.
His marriage plays a big role in it, and it's very interesting, and I want to get to that part of it as well.
Okay, interesting, because I think we've mentioned it on this segment, but definitely on the show before, that the Joseon dynasty, maybe because of recency bias, gets the most limelight in not just dramas, but in just general talk. And when we talk about history and Korea, my kids as well, they know way more about the Joseon dynasty than the Goryeo dynasty or the Silla dynasty.
Absolutely. And there's 2 important reasons for that. One is that what preceded modern South Korea is Japanese colonization. And so there's an effort to, sort of get past that and go back to what was Korea. And so when they do that, the first thing that historians and people, school teachers land on is the Joseon dynasty. The second reason is this. Most of Korean history has been written by the Joseon dynasty historians. And so when they're writing, and between the Goryeo dynasty and the Joseon dynasty, there was an ideological shift. So imagine going from Catholicism to Protestantism. Imagine going from Islam to Christianity. When the new... I keep wondering whether I should say dynasty or dynasty. They're both in my mind, yes.
Both all right.
But when the Joseon dynasty comes in, Pete, what they had to do is they started depicting all the previous kings of the Goryeo as failures, often as perverts. They really wrote some bad things about them because they were the enemy.
They want to get everyone on board with the new dynasty.
And so if you stand today in 2023 and you look at history, all the history of the Joseon kings is pretty good. And it's written in these exalted terms. Not every king, let's be serious, but most of the kings are pictured as noble and virtuous, and they did amazing things. And all the Goryeo ones, were just losers who didn't do anything. But that's where we need that historical skepticism, because that's not actually the case.
Sure, you've got to look at who wrote history and for what purpose, right?
Welcome to Arirang Radio.
If you are in Jeju,
88.7 in Jeju City,
88.1 in Seogwipo City,
101.9 in the Daejeong area.
Arirang Radio.
We're back for part 2 now and then with David talking about kings, queens and Mongolians, the Mongolian influence on Korea. And I did mention it earlier in the show today. I had my interest piqued in Mongolian influence just randomly, coincidentally, by our Friday guest, Angel, who links up from Jeju Island.
That's a lovely name.
Yeah, it is a lovely name. And she is a bit of an angel. But she was mentioning, because we were talking about the horse culture of Jeju. Back in the day, Mongolians went down to Jeju Island, which blew my mind as well, because I wasn't thinking about Mongolian influence on the mainland, let alone Jeju Island. And then they were really impressed by the horse species down there and took a few, because we know, a lot of Genghis Khan horse riding, buccaneering across the continent, and they mixed them with their horses and whatnot. And it got me thinking, does that mean Mongolia had a lot of influence on Jeju? Did they even take over the island? And it got me thinking about everything. And now you're here, which is really a big coincidence. So this is going back to the Goryeo dynasty. Is that when we can say maybe there was some influence from the country?
There was actually. Well, let me just say one thing about the Mongolian horse riders, because Mongolians, they were famous for their horse riding. And what they were able to do is that they would, while riding the horse riders, men and women, they would bend down below the neck of the horse and shoot their arrow from below the neck of the horse.
Wow.
So their whole body was behind the body of the horse, creating a shield.
Interesting.
And then they would fire the arrow at the exact moment that all 4 horses' hooves were off the ground to get the exact accuracy
they
that
would
they
know
wanted.
that timing.
That timing was important, and their whole body would be shielded by the horse. They would be behind the horse, shooting from under the neck.
That's
and so
clever.
They were immense warriors, and they simply couldn't be stopped. They were so immense that they took over China.
Yes, they had the big empire, right?
They took over China for 80 years. They took over Korea. Korea became a vassal state. They took it over here, and this is the period that we're talking about.
Wow.
Mongolia really had a big impact. But let's just step back. Before we talk about Mongolia and the influence, let's talk about the Goryeo dynasty.
Okay, when are we talking then?
This is an amazing thing, because the Goryeo dynasty runs for 500 years almost, Pete. 500 years of one lineage of people, one lineage of kings running. Goes from 918 to 1392, right? And it achieves what we call on Korea the first unification. So the first time that all of Korea is united happens under Goryeo. The modern name of Korea is derived from the name Goryeo.
Oh,
The capital was in modern Kaesong, so it was focused more on the north part of the peninsula, and it becomes the golden age of Buddhism. So all the Buddhist influence that you see in the country today with all the temples, that really comes to light under the Goryeo dynasty.
Interesting. And if you know your universities in Korea, you'll know Goryeo Daehakyo. It's a very good university, but in English it's called Korea University rather than Goryeo. That's interesting.
500 years, and it's all that Buddhist influence. So that's where this really comes to the fore. And of course, after that, with the Joseon, that was the imparting of Confucian influence. And so there was this big ideological split between 500 years of Buddhism. I say 500 years almost. 500 almost years of Buddhism, and then the 500 years of Confucianism that comes afterwards.
Yeah, Buddhism still has its influences today, but I guess in the Goryeo dynasty, it was overwhelmingly the mainstream, right?
It was the number one thing. You had monks that were political leaders. You had monks that were deciding what the country should do. And this came from abroad as well. Of course, Buddhism is not naturally indigenous to Korea. It would have come from up through Nepal, India, and then across from China, Mongolia, and down into the country. So that's where the influence, the cultural influence, was coming at this time.
Okay, so this is, maybe we got the religion through all those different countries, but then later on, during the Goryeo dynasty, we get the Mongolian influence more in your face, I suppose.
Well, we must separate the Mongolians from the Han Chinese. So the Han Chinese, they're sedentary. They're based in what is China today, and you have this ethnic group of people. The Mongolians are separate. Ethnically, culturally, linguistically, they are their own group of people, but they're nomadic.
Okay.
And what they do is this nomadic group of people, from Genghis Khan, they start expanding. They take over China. They take over Beijing. They get in there. And of course, Korea or the Joseon, this part of the world, was always associated with China. The Mongolians, they take over China. They establish the Yuan court. And then this Mongolian influence starts coming in. So this Mongolian clothing style, these Mongolian, have you seen the braids where, for example, the front of the head is shaved a lot and you have these braids at the back? That's the Mongolian hairstyle.
Interesting. And yeah, I don't know how many Koreans as well know much about the Mongolian influence in Korea. You know, when I think of Mongolian in Korea, I could think of the Mongol Panjam, like the big Mongolian birthmark, right? So there must be some mixing of like DNA and stuff for us to call it that, I assume, right?
Absolutely. So the Mongolian spot, the Mongol, what was it, Mongol Jom?
Panjam, I think they call it, yeah.
Which for listeners that don't know, is a blue birthmark, sort of a bluey purple birthmark that appears on the top of a baby's bottom for about 4 or 5 years. Do you know the story about Samshin Halmoni, which is that the shaman spirit, this is a Korean folklore tale, that when the spirit Halmoni was trying to get the baby out of the womb, she would slap its bum to push it out into the world. And that's where the Mongolian mark comes from in that story.
So that must be known, like historically, to come from like Mongolian maybe origins, and a lot of Koreans still have it. My son had it for the longest time, and when we first had him, I was a little bit worried. I was like, what's this big bruise, you know? But it does take years, and then it just dissipates slowly, and a lot of Koreans have that, right?
I've seen statistics that say 80%, 90% of the people have this mark. I couldn't find which one is correct, but a very high number. It's almost omnipresent on the bottoms of Koreans.
So that must mean, if it's true that this is from its Mongolian origins and not just like a misnomer of a name, there's a lot of Mongolian like ancient DNA in Koreans.
I think what happens is Mongolia today is not an economic powerhouse. It's not a cultural powerhouse, but it was. And so we don't really focus on the Mongolian influence because it's not big. China today, whatever you might think of the country, is huge. It's overcome its century of dissolution. It's now gigantic on the economic and world stage. And so we look at Chinese Korean influence. Mongolia, perhaps not, but that doesn't mean in the past Mongolia wasn't this huge power.
Okay, so now we're getting towards King Gongmin?
King Gongmin. Yeah, sorry, sometimes the names get... Because they would change names. Now, King Gongmin, like all the other kings of this time, he was sent to Beijing. He was sent to the Yuan court. So when the Mongolians take over China, what they do is they just establish themselves as the ruling class and they become the Yuan court. Now, what happened is Korean princes would go to Beijing and there they were forced to marry Mongolian princesses. And so this was kind of mixing the Korean and Mongolian Chinese, Beijing influence together. And what this did was by having Mongolian princesses in Korea, in the Korean royal family, it helped the Mongolians sort of maintain some political power here.
That's pretty clever, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you do that mixing. I was hearing about, what was it, the Brits in India, and in the initial stages there was a lot of mixing between the East India Company males and then Indian females.
Yeah.
If you look back at records, they would leave most of their wealth to Indian women, a lot of them in the early days, and then the Brits kind of put a stop to that, thinking that would like dissolve their influence and power to Indians, so they stopped it. This, on the other hand, is trying to spread the Mongolian influence to places like Korea. And if you do it through marriage and then you've got kids who are both, it just automatically kind of entrenches that in you, that Mongolians are there now.
We should get Prince Harry on the show and see what he's got to say about this. Check out the story of Gongmin. I need to get this in. King Gongmin, before he was king, he was sent at the age of 12 from Korea to Beijing, to the Mongolian court at the age of 12. And he was there for 10 years.
Oh, goodness.
He was kept there for 10 years. After 10 years, he meets the Mongolian princess who he's eventually going to marry and become his queen. But this is a person taken out of their country, taken away from their family, sent to a foreign imperial court where they're going to be married. And let's remember, this is a young man. This is not a woman, because we often associate that women would be used as these prizes, as these tools. And of course, yes, they were. But this is a Korean king, and this was not uncommon. This happened to a lot of Korean kings, and that's how Mongolia, or the Mongol people, they controlled influence here on the peninsula.
Yeah, 10 years of influence as well. And we must say it's Princess and then later Queen Noguk.
Noguk.
If you want to go and check that out. Noguk, it's spelled in English and on Wikipedia.
Now,
All about Korea.
Arirang Radio.
We're back for part 3 now and then with David in the studio talking about Mongolian influence during the Goryeo dynasty through King Gongmin. So he's been sent to China for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's known that he's going to, or hoped, I guess, from the Mongolian perspective, that he's going to become the king of Korea.
Yep.
And so they marry him off to one of their princesses.
They marry in Beijing. Right? And so Noguk, her personal name was, and forgive me my pronunciation, but her personal name was Borjigin Budashiri. Now, she was related to Kublai Khan, one of the big Mongolian leaders.
Wow.
And she becomes a member of the Korean royal family through marriage, and she's the last ethnic Mongolian to do so. Now, in the beginning, I said Noduk, but that's not correct. It's Queen Noguk, but she's also sometimes known in Korea as Indok Wanghu, which is Queen Indok. So she has a couple of different names. Now, what's so interesting about this love story is she's the last ethnic Mongolian to become part of the Korean royal family. And these are normally political romances, political marriages.
Sure.
But these two, Queen Noguk and Gongmin, they fall in love.
Oh, real love.
They actually, this is not meant to happen. Like all the marriages before them, they were marriages of convenience. They were marriages of political association. But King Gongmin, he loves his Mongolian queen. He loves her, and they formed this beautiful relationship to each other. But there's only one problem with it, Pete.
What's the problem? Don't tell me that, like, if I'm thinking Henry VIII, then it's maybe heirs.
No, you see, in the United... well, yes, it is heirs.
Okay.
Yeah, it is heirs.
Oh.
No children.
Oh, no. Okay.
So despite their lovely close relationship, and this has been documented in many different things, they were childless. For 15 years, they didn't have a child. And these royal families, they need heirs.
They definitely need heirs. I hope he doesn't behead her. No?
No, see, only us civilized British people behead and imprison and put people on stakes. Over here in Asia, they're a little bit more reserved, let's say.
Good. Well, if they get on so well, they must... I'm guessing that Korea must have been more open to, like, Mongolians, and maybe vice versa. If they've got a good personal relationship, it can help with the relationships of the countries, maybe.
Well, what King Gongmin did when he came back is he decided he's going to remove all the Mongolian aristocrats from Korea. And during the Mongol invasions of Korea, when they started taking land, when they went down to Jeju and were walking across the peninsula, King Gongmin decided, we're taking all that land back.
Oh, interesting.
And then King Gongmin banned Mongolian customs, such as the Mongolian hairstyle, the wearing of Mongolian costumes. He said, none of that anymore. And what he really tried to do, and this is why some historians now are trying to go past the Joseon sources and say, hey, he tried to make Korea again. He tried to get rid of the foreign influences.
That does seem, from a Korean perspective, a great thing to do to keep our culture, pure, so to speak, quote unquote.
And well, also to speak truth to power, because there was this big sort of foreign invading power that was coming to Korea, and it wasn't China, it wasn't Japan, it wasn't America, it was Mongolia. It was the Mongolian tribes that were trying to control this peninsula, and they did, like, to a great extent. And it was King Gongmin that rallied against it. And he rallied against it with the love of his life, his Mongolian queen.
I didn't see that coming. Like, I was thinking, if that was me, I'd then become like pro everything my wife is, perhaps. But maybe this is the opposite. Maybe she was on board saying, okay, you know, we're a Korean power couple now, you know, let's keep Korea as Korea. Yeah. Perhaps. Yeah.
But I think there's this huge part of history is that you hear a lot about the Shilla dynasty, don't you? Yeah. And you hear a lot about the Joseon dynasty. But there was this approximately 500 year period of Korean history, one imperial family that was ruled by Buddhism with huge Mongolian influence. And that just seems to be lost in any discourse today. And like I say, some of the troubles is because all the history of it was written by the dynasty that came after it, which was always therefore trying to say those guys were bad. We are the real people here to rule you. So you listen to us, not those previous people.
Yeah, and I suppose because of the Mongol Empire then as well, that history is a bit painful. Just like maybe what comes after Joseon, you know, the Japanese Empire, again, quote unquote, is maybe not the part of history we want to highlight the most. But it is, you know, the Mongol Empire was seen as one of the biggest in the world at the time, right? Stretching all the way through nearly to Europe and whatnot. And it's really interesting that on Daily K we can highlight this. So no children, no heirs. What happens next? Do they?
He has a King Gongmin. He has, let's say, King U comes after him, and this is his son with a concubine. There's a lot of mystery about this, but Queen Noguk, after 15 years, becomes pregnant. But then in complications related to the childbirth, she dies in 1365. King Gongmin, he just goes into this huge depression. And for the last years of his life, the Joseon historians say he went mad. But basically, he just retreated from politics and only did Buddhist practices. He just decided, I've had enough of that. He let one of his Buddhist monks run the whole country for him. This was the Buddhist monk Shindon.
And he said, lost interest.
He really lost interest. And, you know, this kind of maybe led to the fall of the Goryeo dynasty eventually. But the loss of his wife just affected him so bad. He built a tomb for her near Kaesong, and she's buried in that mound. King Gongmin was also eventually, when he died, he was buried in a mound next to her, and those tombs are still there.
Oh, wow. You can go and check them out.
These are 1362 tombs, Pete. Wow. And you can still see them there. And so, you know, you have these refurbished palaces around the city, and a lot of these are modern reconstructions of these things. But the tombs of this Korean king who loved his Mongolian queen and who was fighting against the influence of the nomadic Kublai Khan people, they're still there, and it's a lovely part, and shows you how love can play a role in history.
Yeah, I mean, Gyeongju's famous for its tombs, right? But you do see, if you are well familiar with Korea, when you're driving around, there's often a little brown sign which indicates, you know, a tourist spot, and it'll say a royal tomb is here, like in Gyeonggi-do province, or all up and down the country. And maybe one of the reasons they're not as famous as the palaces, number one, they're not in the capital, so not many tourists are going to go and see them. And number two, yeah, they are just a big hill, unfortunately, you know, from the outside. And when I went down to Gyeongju, I spoke to one of the experts, and they said only one or two of the tombs, you know, have been opened up, and then they've seen what's inside, and maybe you can go in maybe one or two of them. The rest of them, they were saying, and I'm not sure how accurate it is, that we really respect the dead, and especially the royal dead. So we've just left them intact. So you can't really know what's even inside, right? You haven't opened them up like the pyramids, and there's not been too many of them looted and things like that. In terms of King Gongmin, then he just dies peacefully, and that's the end of his life, and he gets buried together.
He gets he's kind of assassinated by the hands of his bodyguards in 1374. Because the aristocrats, the people in the country with power, they're unhappy with this king that's walked away, and he's not doing his job. And so factions infighting, it often happens, and this becomes the legacy of King Gongmin. This was the last straw that brings down the Goryeo dynasty.
So he's not the very last king.
He's not the very last.
End.
That came to the end with King Wu, who succeeded King Gongmin. So he's the penultimate one.
Wow.
But, just imagine that love had produced a child. Just imagine the story had gone a little bit differently. We wouldn't have had maybe the Joseon dynasty that comes after it. Things might have been different, right? Should those have gone. I just want to make this one point about tombs, because sometimes when we think about tombs or we look at palaces, we have images in our mind that we're used to. Palaces should be big, grand. Tombs, we want the Taj Mahal. You've got to be able to see it from 5 blocks away. But that's just from our culture, or that's from other cultures. That doesn't have to be the way. And the tombs here, you say they look like hills, and that's Buddhist. That's becoming part of the nature, isn't it? That's returning to the land. That's becoming, you're not an artificial artifice placed on top of it, but you are part of the soil. You become a tree. You become a hill. Yeah. And it's very Buddhist, actually.
And they're very, peaceful when you go down to Gyeongju and see those tombs in some of the parks there. And I'm all for them. And even the burial mounds here are just like mini versions of them, almost, the traditional mounds.
Yeah.
And I also really like those, although, in Korean culture, it's not really desired to live close by to burial mounds. My wife and I were looking at houses, whereas in the UK, you live near a cemetery, that's just normal kind of thing.
Because the cemetery's near the church, and the church is in the centre of town.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was all for moving there. She was like, no, I don't want to be looking at tombs every morning over my morning coffee. And I was like, what's wrong with that? And then I guess that's, again, a cultural difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting talk today about the Mongolian influence in King Gongmin. And I think that in the future, he could be held up as a kind of patriotic figure who protected our unique culture.
I think more will come. There's more stories to be told once Korea has finished its, look at Joseon and things like that. This Goryeo period, this Buddhist period. I think as economic and capitalism gets a bit much, people might start looking at that. It might be a reflection of the modern society more than anything else.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to it.
Yeah, you did it first on Daily K. You can always say that, Mr. Tishouse. We will see you again next time. Thanks for coming in, David.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
You can listen to Monday's segment Now and Then with David Tizard every Monday from 10 a.m. KST on #DailyK.